Welcome to the sixth Lunch and Learn session in the series on operational excellence. This session's topic is achieving buy-in. Utilizing the Socratic Method to persuade people and to achieve group consensus. This session is sponsored by Jamestown Community College Workforce Readiness. The session is facilitated by Max Krug from Future State Engineering. We hope that you enjoy the session.
Okay, good day everyone. Today's session 6 is on achieving buy-in and is utilizing the Socratic Method to persuade people and to achieve group consensus. If we want to make improvements to the organization, and again, we're looking for breakthrough improvements, so 20, 40, 80% improvement in performance, not 2-3% we're talking here. So in order to get that quantum leap in performance, we need to make sure we have everybody on board and we all have the correct mindset. So we need a method that we can persuade people and get group consensus to driving change. So that's what today's session is about. So again, back to our necessary conditions. Today, we're focusing on the two bottom ones, establishing the correct mindset to achieve sustainable improvement and to create that positive change in organizational culture. So our Dilbert cartoon, what is not buy-in to change? So the boss says, our differentiating value-added strategy is transformational change. So how is that? How was that? Does everyone feel different? And the one woman says, my urge to hurl was increased a little bit. He says, that's what change feels like. Okay, so the point here is we don't want people to feel that change is something bad. It's going to make us worse or make us feel sick, right? We need to embrace change. We need to get people to buy into change if we're going to take that quantum leap in improvement. So I want to start talking about what are the typical layers of resistance, so why people resist change. So we have 7 layers of resistance that people, when you're in a group facilitation, you're going to see people at different layers, right? So that's why it's so difficult in a group setting to get consensus when we have people at different layers of resistance. Okay, so layer 0, this was added after the first 6 were implemented or identified because people realize it's like some people don't even understand why we need to change, right? So layer 0 is people don't even agree that we need to change. So we have a disagreement that there's even a need for change. Okay, layer 1 is we disagree on the problem. Layer 2 is disagreement on the direction of the solution. Layer 3 is disagreement on the details of the solution. Layer 4 is disagreement on the negative ramifications. So people can see the idea, but they see a bunch of negative consequences of doing the change. Layer 5 is disagreement on the details of implementation. And layer 6 is disagreement on the risk, and we call that unverbalized fear. So in order to get complete buy-in, we need to go through all these layers of resistance and get buy-in. So if we go back to our change matrix that we talked about a few sessions ago. So we have the 4-box matrix here where we have the positives of not changing, the positives of change, the negatives of not changing, and the negatives of change. So if you remember, our alligators are in the box of negative of not changing. So these are things that are biting us every day. But we really want to achieve this pot of gold, right? That's our objective, is to create this high-performing organization. But we also have some people that don't even understand why we need to change. Things are fine the way they are. We also have people that only see the negative implications of the change. So if you're in a group setting trying to facilitate a change, you're going to have people in all of these quadrants. Okay, so if we go back to our resistance to change, what we see is the people in this first quadrant here of the mermaid, they're at layer 0. They're saying, why do we need to change? Things are fine, right? I don't even see why we have a need for change. Okay, next we have these people that are the alligators, right? They can see the effects, but they don't know the cause. And of course, everyone has different effects, so they believe it's different causes. So we have people that don't even agree on the problem that the solution is actually solving. And then we have a group in this quadrant here with the crutches that are at layer 2 that disagree on the direction. They say, yes, we agree that we need to change, but we don't agree that that's the right solution because there's negative consequences of that. So I think we should take another path to the solution. Okay, so when you're in a group setting, you got people in all different layers. So unless you're a master at facilitating groups to get group consensus, you're just going to get frustrated and walk out of the meeting like, man, it's like these people, right? You're going to get frustrated because you're going to have resistance to your idea. So the buy-in process is opposite of the resistance to change. So first thing we need to do is we need to agree that there's a problem. So the people that are in that quadrant with the mermaid, we need to get them to understand that there is a problem and that there is a need for change. The second step is we agree on the problem. So once we agree that there is a need for change, then we need group consensus on what is the problem that we're trying to solve. Then we get agreement on the direction of the solution. So there's multiple ways we could solve the problem. Of course, if we have an idea and we're presenting our idea, we have one way of solving that problem. That's the direction of the solution that we need to go. Then once we get the direction of the solution, then we need to agree on the details, right? So all the details of how we're gonna implement that change. Then we look to see if there's any negative ramification of that problem. So to be a complete solution, we need to solve the problem, but we also need to prevent any negative implications. These are almost more important than solving the problem itself. Step 6, we agree on the details of the implementation. So we agree of every step, the tactics that are necessary to achieve that result, that pot of gold. And step 7, we agree that all the risks can be mitigated, right? So we don't expect to eliminate the risks, but we expect to at least reduce them. Okay, so the Socratic method is we're trying to get agreement going through this 7-step process, right? So we don't go to the details of implementation before we get agreement on the problem. And I see that all the time in companies, right? Someone has a solution and, right, what problem is that solution solving? Well, we don't know. We just think if we should be doing this, right? So we got to go back and make sure that we're identifying the problem and the solution actually solves the problem that we're trying to address. So let's talk about the Socratic method. So the Socratic method, it's a form of cooperative argument, dialogue between individuals based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and to draw out ideas. Okay, so the important thing is here, it's critical thinking. So we need to change people's paradigms, right? We can't get breakthrough results using the same thinking that we've done in the past, right? So I think Einstein had a quote, something like, we can't use the same thinking to solve the problem that created the problem in the first place. Okay, so we got to do something different. So in order to do that, we need to change the mindset. So I said earlier, one of the necessary conditions is we change that mindset. So we have a rule here, never tell the person that you're speaking with that they're wrong or don't know what they're talking about. Okay, you want to shut down a conversation, try that. Okay, so then you're just going to get like, well, this person, right, doesn't know what they're talking about, and it's just going to create tension. So the reason that they believe what they are saying is correct is because they don't understand that they might be using a false assumption, right? So they have an assumption about reality that might not be true, right? Once we recalibrate their mindset, then they can invalidate that assumption, then we get the buy-in. So the Socratic method, we're trying to ask questions to get them to understand where the flaw is in their thinking, and then giving them ideas on how to recalibrate their thinking. So part of this process is developing the right questions. So there's different types of questions that we can ask when we're doing the Socratic method. So there's 4 types of questions. The first one is a closed question. So what is a closed question? That's any question that can be answered with a yes or no answer. Okay, so if we're trying to create a conversation with the person or the group, we don't want to use closed questions, right? We want to create some conversation and start to stimulate thinking. So we want to use open questions. Okay, so open questions require more than a one-word answer. Okay, so we start asking open-ended questions, and then we can start to understand where their flaw in thinking may be happening. So we want to use probing questions. So probing questions can't be prepared for ahead of time. So based on the conversation you're having, you're going to start to understand where there's misalignment between your thinking and the other person. So now we want to start asking deeper questions to learn more about their current mindset. Okay, so those are probing questions. And then last is leading questions. So we use these questions for clarification or understanding purposes. So a lot of times a leading question is you repeat back to the person what you heard, and you say, is this what you said? And you repeat back to them. Okay, so one thing we don't want to do is misunderstand what they said to us. Okay, so a leading question is to reverbalize what you heard from them and repeating it back to them to get confirmation that you heard them correctly. Okay, so the questions are an important part of the Socratic method. So let's talk about applying the Socratic method. So first of all, prior to any conversation or group meeting, make sure you clearly understand the objective you're trying to achieve. So what's your pot of gold? Okay, then clearly define the cause and effect thinking that's necessary to achieve that objective. So you have where you are currently, where you want to get to, what's all the cause and effect things that need to happen to transition from current state to future state. You need to understand that logical sequence. Okay, so before you have any conversation, make sure you understand those 2 things. Then once you have the conversation, you can present the idea and challenge the person to explain their justification for why the objective can't be attained. So an example might be, so there's multiple ways to do this, right? So you might go into a meeting and say, hey, I have this crazy idea, but I want to understand, right, what you think about it and why you think it might not work. Okay, so when you do that, you can start getting information about their current paradigm or what assumption they might have that might be false. Second, give a counterexample or an analogy where the current paradigm does not hold true. So one of the things we want to do in part of our homework prior to the conversation is understand, is there an analogy that I can use in the session when I'm talking to this person, or can I give an example where their way of thinking doesn't hold true? Third, ask whether they've experienced that condition and let them explain their experience. So if you give them a situation and they experience that, right, let them explain that situation. So that's part of the changing of the mindset. Then last, challenge that person to articulate your cause and effect thinking using the new paradigm of way of thinking, right? So get them to repeat what your cause and effect thinking is to achieve that objective. Okay, so I'd like to give an example here. So I went into a company, they were having all sorts of problems. We did a brainstorming session of all their alligators, right? So we had 5 flip chart pages of problems. Okay, so I said to them, okay, so your homework is to go back before next week's session and come up with reasons why we have all these problems. So they came back the next week. I said, okay, what did we come up with? They're like, we don't know. So I said, well, I thought about it and I have an idea. So my idea is the information that you're using to make decisions is not timely and it's not accurate. Okay, so that was my presentation of my idea. And they're like, well, we don't understand. What do you mean by that? So I go, well, let's use an example. So one of the issues is profitability suffering. So if we look at profitability and say, okay, there's multiple things that could cause low profitability. So let's talk about pricing first, right? So how do you price your products? So do you price your products with positive margin? They're like, of course we do. We'd be stupid to not price products with positive margin. Okay, so you price all your products with positive margin. So all the products that you produce during the month have positive margin. So at the end of the month, we should have a positive net profit. Have you ever had a month where you didn't have positive net profit? Yep. How can that be? Right, so there was a counterexample where all the products have profitable margin, but we had a loss at the end of the month. How can that be? Right, explain to me how that can happen. Right, so the engineering manager goes, well, because we didn't have enough volume to break even. Okay, I agree. So pricing products based on margin, is that the best approach to driving profitability? Probably not. Okay, so now we need to recalibrate their thinking. So when you price products, you're pricing them independent, but the organization is a dynamic environment. You're producing multiple products at the same time, right? So if there's one example where the current thinking doesn't hold true, the whole basis of that, the foundation of that thinking isn't valid. So Dr. Goldratt was a PhD in physics. He said, in physics, you can have a theory. If there's one situation where the theory doesn't hold true, the whole theory is null and void. Okay, so we have this condition where we price all our products with positive margin, but we had a loss, right? So something's wrong. So we need to recalibrate our thinking and decide what's the new paradigm, what's the new way of thinking in order to get breakthrough results. I hope that makes sense to people. So let's go through a quick overview of the buy-in process. So first, understand the layer of resistance, and more importantly, the buy-in process, right? So what are those 7 buy-in steps? We need to go through them in sequence, right? We don't skip steps in the buy-in process. When we're applying the Socratic method, first, prepare before the meeting or discussion, right? So preparation is an extremely important part of that session, right? Never tell the person that you're speaking with that they're wrong or don't know what they're talking about. Use the appropriate type of questions to create the conversation, right? So we're going to use closed, open, probing, leading questions. Use an analogy or an example to demonstrate the change in thinking required to change the paradigm. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. The only way to get good at this is to practice. So if you've never experienced using the Socratic method, right, use a trusted ally, practice, right, and then have a discussion about what went wrong, and again, try it again, right? So the only way to get good is to practice. Start one-on-one, then once you're good at one-on-one, move to a group session. And again, remember, you're going to have people in all 4 of those quadrants. So how do you deal with each of those people? Okay, so the process that we've developed is our design sprint. So if you want to see the Socratic method in action, our design sprint uses the Socratic method to get group consensus and buy-in for breakthrough performance improvement. Okay, so we start with the alligators, we define the pot of gold, we address all the things that we're doing well, that we don't want to change, we address the risk, and we come up with a comprehensive solution. And it's all through the Socratic method. And of course, in order to get breakthrough improvement, we need to change some of the mindset. So part of the analysis when going through identifying all the alligators, we need to understand the mindset that's causing those undesirable effects. All right, so part of the process is educating people on the new paradigm or new mindset in order to get to the future state, right? We can't use the same thinking to get to the future state that we're using today. Okay, so that's today's session. Thanks everyone for attending. And again, I'll turn it over to Delana to talk about the next upcoming session. So we finished the first three group series. We're going to the last series coming up next week. So Delana, do you want to talk briefly about this?
Sure, thanks, Max. On behalf of JCC's Workforce Readiness and Future State Engineering, I wanted to thank everybody for attending today's session. As Max was sharing with you, we have the last segment, or the third of 3 segments coming up, and the topics that will be included are June 3rd is improving flow, June 10th is being productive versus busy work, and June 17th is developing an employee skills matrix. Max, I don't know if maybe you want to share a little bit or give people a sneak peek of what some of those might be about.
Yeah, so the improving flow doesn't matter what type of environment, whether you're service, healthcare, whether you're an institution or a manufacturer, right? We need to understand what flow means for your environment. So there's always opportunities to improve flow. Okay, then part of that, what supports the improving flow is converting people from being busy to being productive, right? So that's what we're going to talk about the June 10th. And then because we have typically in most organizations unbalanced flow, we'll talk about that next week, we need to be able to cross-train people to flex our resources based on changing demands, right? So the employee skills matrix is an important tool to help us understand who and when we can flex people to different areas of the organization. So I think now we can talk about questions. Is there any questions from today's session?
Yes, there's one that came into the chat. It says, Max, is the Socratic, whoops, it just scrolled off the screen. Sorry about that. Is the Socratic method done in a one-on-one or in a group format? I guess I'm thinking if the group doesn't usually get along that well, does this affect the buy-in?
Yes. So again, I would practice in a one-on-one situation. And then once you're good at one-on-one, move to a group session. So one of my key things that I do is when I go to the group session, make sure you have an internal advocate in that session, right? Somebody that's on your side, right? Don't go to a meeting where everybody's going to be against you, right? So have someone that's on your side that can help support your argument or your idea, right? They need to be in the same mindset. So it's a good technique to practice with that person that's your internal advocate. Have them in the meeting with you when you go to attempt to do it in the meeting so that they can help support you during that process, right? So if you start to stumble, start to have problems, right, that internal advocate can help you through that process.
And in a group setting, do you need to lay out a set of rules for everyone to follow?
I typically don't. It's personal preference there. So what I do is, I'll give another example. I did a company with an engineering group, so a bunch of engineers. So the problem was they weren't able to turn quotes quickly, so it took a long time to get quotes done. And the accuracy of the quotes wasn't real good, right? So we got the engineering group together, and the general manager wanted to shorten the quote cycle time and improve the accuracy, right? That was our pot of gold. And so I basically let the engineers complain about all their issues, right? So I want to raise the alligator, right? So I let them complain about all the issues, and then I got them to come up with so that's the first layer, right? Why change? Right, so why do we need to change? Well, all these alligators are biting us. So once we got that step done, right, everyone agreed, yeah, we probably could do some things different. And then we said, okay, now we need to give them some different mindset. So we had done some training in the past, And so if people haven't done the confetti ripping game, right, that's a good game to do. And they had done the ripping game to understand how unproductive multitasking or task switching is. Right, so we said, okay, let's talk about that example when we did the task switching. What did we learn? Okay, so they would start on one project, they start on one quote, then they would get pulled off, go to another quote, right, start working on that, get pulled off, go to a third quote, and they're jumping between quotes. Right, so the paradigm is start one quote, finish it. Doesn't matter what external forces are causing you to change, right? So one of the things we need to do is to reduce that external force that are forcing us to change to a different quote. Oh, customer needs this one by the end of the day. Stop working on that one, work on this one. Okay, so I took them systematically through those layers of resistance. And of course, some people came up with ideas and other people would shoot them down. So as a facilitator, when somebody shoots down somebody's idea, you need to take that person and say, hey, okay, I agree that this is a problem. Then flip the idea and send it back to them. So you see this as a problem. Do you have any idea on how to overcome that problem? Right, so if they raise a concern, most likely they have an idea on how to overcome that concern, right? So flip it back and have them verbalize how they would overcome that idea, right? So now they're getting buy-in, right? It's their idea. So anytime someone resists or says, well, that's not gonna work, right? Take that and say, why won't it work? And flip it back to them and say, give me ideas on how it could work. Right? And if they can't come up with ideas, then solicit, but make sure you give them first opportunity. If they can't come up with an idea, solicit other people in the group to come up with the idea. Okay, so it's a lot of practice. It's a lot of learning. It's a difficult thing to master, but once you get good at it, it's like, it's unbelievable how fast you can get group consensus and get buy-in from people. Any other questions, comments?
It's does utilizing this method lead to more efficient and effective meetings? I think sometimes we have too many meetings that end with no action plans as an outcome, and then just schedule another meeting.
Yep, that's a great point, right? So I see so many meetings are ineffective. So we talked about a little bit this last week, right? Identifying normal condition and abnormal condition, right? So in meetings, don't talk about normal conditions, talk about abnormal conditions. Then those abnormal conditions, what's the cause, right? So get a good problem statement. So many companies jump to solutions before they understand what the problem is. So again, understanding those layers of resistance or the buy-in process, we gotta get consensus on the problem. If you don't get consensus on the problem, people will just be throwing ideas of things we need to change before we understand what we're actually trying to achieve. And that's where meetings just drag on and nothing ever comes out of it. So then we gotta schedule another meeting to talk about the meeting we just had. I mean, we should add another series in here about effective meetings. That would probably be a good one to add. Hopefully I answered that question. You know, and if you look at how much management time is wasted in meetings, so the company I did work with, their production meeting was probably 12 people for an hour and a half. It's now 15 minutes, right? So take 12 people times an hour and 15 minutes. That's how much capacity we freed up each day to do more productive things.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Comments?
Great stuff. Impressive as usual, Max.
Thanks.
Yes, we have one comment that says, thanks Max and team. I've learned so much in these lunch and learn sessions.
Good, now go apply.
Yeah.
Right? Step out of your comfort zone, right? So that's one thing I've learned. I'm sort of an introvert, right? So it's like very difficult for me to step out of my comfort zone. But I've learned it's like step out of your comfort zone and you can learn so much by doing that.
Max, I do have one question.
Yep.
So do you just put this method in place, or do you go in and your first training is let everyone know what this method is about and that we're asking probing questions for a reason, and just so they understand the system and so that they're all using the system? Is it better to have them all on board, or just the system and you go in and use it?
I mean, ideally, we want to have the internal capability to do it, right? To sustain,
Right.
The company needs to have the internal capability, right? It's a difficult process to master. So I would suggest trying to identify champions that are good at cause and effect thinking, and then it can facilitate groups and get those people trained, because then you can start utilizing those people in meetings to have more effective meetings, right? Not everybody's going to be able to do this. Right. So identify the people that have the skills to do it, develop those skills, and then create those internal people that are needed for sustainability. So they watch me. So typically when we do either the operational excellence workshop or the design sprint, they get a chance to see me facilitate using the Socratic method.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Okay, thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Max.
And team.
All right, have a good day, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks, Mac. Take care.
You too.